in order to talk kind of more about how these concepts kind of come together, I invited a good friend of mine, a senior UX designer at Essentia Health, Nick Loining, to talk to us about his experience growing UX and product development. Nick, you there?
I am.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So to kick it off, why don't you tell us a little bit about Essentia Health?
Yeah, Essentia Health is an integrated health system. We span across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and North Dakota. We're made up of 14 hospitals, 70 clinics, 13 senior living facilities, and then a research institute. And
Wow.
we have 13,500 employees, and that includes more than 2,100 physicians and advanced practitioners.
Wow. Okay, that sounds pretty sizable. And so tell us a little bit about your role at Essentia Health.
Yeah, I am the senior UX designer at Essentia, so really I am kind of that point of contact for any product requests. Was really to start that process. I have a team of three, which includes myself, a developer, and then a content specialist. And then effectively, we just kind of my role is to make sure that our goals are in alignment with our stakeholders. I go ahead and work on architecting the build plans, building the prototypes, doing research, then also making sure that we're building some accessible products as well. So yeah,
Awesome. That sounds like a lot of responsibilities.
yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. So through our own conversations, I know UX at Essentia Health has come a long way. Why don't you tell me about how you got started there at Essentia?
Yeah, well, when I first started working on 6 years ago, I was the Lone Ranger for the website. I oversee the website. And at the time, there was no UX. It was all basically designed by directive. So we just would meet with, clients and internal clients, and they would just tell us what they wanted, and we did it. And we tried to do our best to, think a little bit more audience-based. But at that time, it was really just go in, get the work done, and then get on our way. Um, and then there was also one other FTE that was our digital marketing specialist at that time. So, in between then, our organization put forth a online patient experience initiative. With that came a new website build, some new roles, and as part of those new roles, the UX designer role came to be. And so that's when I got the opportunity to take on that role. And to me, coming from web design and front end development, kind of doing that design by directive for the first front of my career, then rolling into that web admin role where you're getting more of that holistic view of like websites, performance data, the analytics. And then just more of those load times, all sorts of things. It's like it really just I think made sense to really step into that role. And of course, once you step into UX, which by the way is way harder than it sounded at the time. You really, once you open that door and you just want to answer all the questions why, there's really no turning back for me. So, and I think as we kind of started to expand that role, we were able to, as part of this online patient experience initiative, we ran our first moderated usability study. And so for the first time, we brought 40 users in to test the primary features and the navigability, I guess I would say, of our primary features on the new website, and started really doing some of that guerrilla style research as well. Yeah, and then so that leads really to where we are now. After 3 years of doing this. Again, I'd mentioned we have a team of three, myself, a developer, and a content specialist. And so UX is really starting to be built into everything that we do, that design process. We're moving toward executing up to 24 user studies this fiscal.
Oh, wow.
And really, honestly, just everything that we've done, that we do now is part of that more user-centric approach. We're using data to drive our design, our process, and really just try to get better results really with what we're going after and be more efficient about it.
That sounds awesome. So a lot more user focused. So what kind of factors do you credit with growing UX?
I would say as far as goal orientation, I would say is probably the number one, as you just talked about, goal orientation is the number one factor, I think, as part of growing UX with Essentia Health here. I found that when we meet with clients, you know, if as you basically as you've covered a lot of, if you're not in alignment, your whole entire process moving forward is basically disrupted, right? You just maximize, or not really maximize, but you have a higher probability of running into risk when you're going through and completing the process. If you have curveballs thrown at you, which they always do get thrown at you after your initial scoping, you really aren't prepared to be able to handle some of those things and think through them thoughtfully. So I think goal orientation is a big thing, but I also think too, as far as like expanding UX, being able to connect with your internal clients, I think at more of a relatable level too. So when we talk about evangelizing and really expanding the UX footprint, I think when you first meet with clients and other stakeholders, sometimes I think, when you look at the nuts and bolts of UX, it can get kind of pretentious sometimes when you talk about like mental models and spatial memory and all these sort of things, right? And so, I think the biggest part of that is really just getting to their level and just talking, really explaining like what that impact is. Like, what does the UX mean to what we're trying to do? Why are we goal orienting, right? Why are we doing the things that we're doing? It's not really just about holding up the process or design control or anything like that. It's really about improving the product that we're going after.
Right.
And so I think that's that really other big part of it is just being able to connect with UX, your stakeholders, right? Look at your audience, I think, and learn how to connect with them to really help continue and evangelize that. And then as you go through it, they can see those results as you go through that process. They can see what the goal orientation did for them. They can see why the product is better, and you can get your stakeholders to start actually looking through more of that user-centric lens as well.
That's awesome. And I think you're right about that. As I know in my own personal experiences, UX can kind of come off sounding like a little pretentious, right? Because, we want to sound, sometimes UX designers want to sound smart, right? And we want to be able to talk about, the reason we know why this works, but it's really, at the end of the day, it's about what's the outcome? What is this actually going to do for us?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So what would you say about, kind of having to convince people? Like, how do you convince people that UX is important? I think you said a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think again, meeting with them at their level, but it's really the proof is in the pudding, right? It's like you can, once you can kind of get them just to listen a little bit, it's like you have to walk them through the process and kind of set expectations. I think that making them feel comfortable with what you're doing is obviously number one. But I think, again, when you start at that goal orientation spot to help kind of start delivering and convincing, which I always say, the goal orientation, but it's so rudimentary that it's so easy to blow past, and really then you set yourself up for trouble if you can't really prove that what we're trying to do is going to have impact. But after you get through that goal orientation spot and you work through your activities to get everybody thinking in kind of that audience type lens, it goes on then to how you follow up in that process. And it's about being able to kind of report out on some of those results, and using things like prototypes and those items to help kind of carry that message through as well, to say, hey, look, we started here with our goals and this big huge wave of ideas. We were able to really just hone in and say, what are our goals, what's our audience, what are our objectives, and start to really take this big cloud of an idea that everybody's a part of and engaged on, and start to really materialize it. And then as you go through the process, you bring your stakeholders along with you. They can see it working as you go till you get to that product. And what we have found is more often than not, going through this process, that we come up with a concept and a prototype, and everybody is like, this is along the lines of what we're thinking. There might be some tweaks or anything like that, but it's like, it just shows like we don't have any more. We don't have 4 meetings to sit down and figure out what we're trying to do just for that first phase. Like, it starts to show from like just an internal time standpoint, how much less time it takes, and really it's just more efficient engagement with everybody.
That's awesome. That's great. And so what kind of impact have you seen UX make at Essentia Health?
Oh, I mean, the quality of our ideas that have come out between, when you can't have research at every around every corner to use. When we do start like generating ideas or concepts, the quality of ideas, and just really again through the lens of a patient for our cases, they're just much better. They're more honed in by the end of those activities. It's not so much of a having to chase people down or rein people in so much anymore. I think that when you're going through, from goal orientation to those activities you use to generate content or to generate ideas, I always say I get this proud dad moment, because, you have a varying number of stakeholders who work at various levels within the organization. And so, you go through that process and you have all these ideas going and you have new concepts come up while you're generating ideas, but you'll finally hear, one of the stakeholders say, hey, we have this idea and we're talking a lot about this, but does this still fit our goal? And it's like,
Right.
yes, it's like, you don't, like, when you're facilitating these things, you don't have to feel like you're like nudging people, like you just see it happen in front of you. So you get this proud dad moment, like, yes, they're getting it, the philosophy, the thought behind it, and the way we want to think about our products and what we're trying to do here. It's really taking.
That's awesome. And do you have an example of how, what kind of impact that's made, not only for patients, but for kind of like operationally or development?
Yeah. I, when we were recently working on a specific toolkit around COVID, and we were going through, and it's one of those things where when you have such a small turnaround time, because COVID hits, and it's like, we have to serve our patients and we have to be able to give information when they need it. I think an example of really when that process I've been able to see it work was really how fast we were able to knock out ideas that weren't part of it, or that were getting out of scope, or that were the scope was getting way too wide. How quickly we were able to turn that around, saying, hey, look, our goal is to make sure that we're putting up digital products for a certain specific audience. Like, let's keep focused. And we had a turnaround time of like, I don't know, it was like 3 days for this product. So it was fantastic. And it was just really, the ideas, all of them that were coming out, were all specific and related to the goal that we were trying to accomplish. So, that was awesome. And then on the flip side of it too, you have that better experience for the patients, right? So all this thought that we are putting into it, all this work that we're putting into it, you're getting good feedback for what's, how the product's being used. It's more direct. So, you're able to really complete both, the goals internally to keep processes more efficient, but also externally really put out a product that's usable, and makes an impact
That's
for your
awesome.
audience. So, yeah.
And so I guess in closing, like, what would you say is like the biggest takeaway for you? Like, what's the most important part of your product development process?
I'm going to have to go back to really, again, just goal orientation and setting the tone there. I think if you can get, your goals, and then, your audiences and your objectives all aligned throughout your entire team, your development team, your stakeholders, you really mitigate the chance for risk. I mean, it gets to the point, it's really where we can go ahead and land anything, because when we are in our meetings, like our developer and content specialists, they're not in these meetings when we initially meet, right? We have a very small team. They have to be doing work. So the most important thing we can do is get that alignment. So when I walk out of that meeting, I can perfectly articulate what it is we're trying to do, and they can get going, and we can get to it. And the same thing on on their side of the ball for the stakeholders. Everybody's going to know what we're doing, so they can go walk away from that meeting and be able to articulate that to who they need to articulate it to. And so by the time you get to the end of it, it's we get back and there's very minimal change.
Focused. Awesome. Dude, Nick, thank you so much. Do we have any questions for Nick, or?
Yeah, we do. So we actually got one that maybe, Nick, you can answer for specifically Essentia Health. Where does the UX team normally sit in the organization? Is it a part of the organization, or is it somewhere else? Is it part of IT? Is it part of, where do you sit in Essentia Health?
So we sit within the marketing communications department, and we're kind of like our own little hub, the digital marketing team. So that's where we sit, yeah.
So we had another comment, and I guess, Nick, I'd like to get your kind of feedback on this. Is one of the comments was, when people are building back-end systems, how important it is to have a UX and UI experience, so that you know, the UX designers understand the back end and understand how it works. Do you guys do that at Essentia Health? Is that how it works? Do you get to see the back end planning process so that you have an understanding of the problems and when you're setting up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also critical. You know, for what I do, I'm very blessed. First of all, to have, you know, the leadership I have that very much supports what we do. But I'm tied, basically, myself and our developer are tied to the hip. Like, you know, I'll go through and, you know, being that I used to do development, I have a little bit of a leg up because I understand the architecture of our site. I understand the back end working. So usually, unless I'm at a very advanced concept, like I can help make some of those decisions up front. It's like, oh yeah, I know our system can do this, or that they can't. But when it gets into the weeds, I'm always basically talking to our developer anyway. I like to keep them up to speed as we go because, you know, it's like you don't want to make any assumptions either. So you don't want to throw any. So whenever I come up with my concept, he's the first person I check with. I'm like, hey, this is what I'm going for. You know, this is what I'm thinking the data could pull from to make your guys' life easier when we have to do updates. Like, what do you think? And he'll go through and be like, well, here's what I think the risk could be, or here, no, this looks great. You know, so we'll be able to address those things before I get to taking it to the stakeholders. The stakeholders see it, and as long as they sign off, we're pretty much off to the races, and a lot of that risk has already been assessed.
Well, those are it for the questions. I know we have some developers coming up shortly who will probably attest to how important it is that a designer understand the actual back end and the actual development side. So,
right.
Thank you, Nick.
Nick, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Absolutely. My pleasure.